Welcome back, everyone, to week one, day one's first lecture. Thank you for everyone that was so gracious to introduce themselves. I'm excited for this class. Let's go ahead and dive in. And as I've stated, we're going to dive into an intro to Python lecture. So we're going to talk a lot about what Python is and why we're using it, as well as the differences between the language Python and what we're most familiar with at this point, which should be JavaScript, right? Because we had the intro to programming week, which was all JavaScript training. This lecture shouldn't be so stressful, like we told you. The only hard part is just flipping over syntax from JavaScript to Python. So it's a lot of review of concepts that we should already be well familiar with, that you guys have been tested on already. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. But before I do that, let me tell you where you can find my slide will be on a recording. You guys can always see that. But if you want to review this information yourself, what you should do is go to, you should already have Python set up. We already installed it with everyone. If you don't have that, please drop by our office, one of the TAs or instructor's office. And if you click to week one, day one, or Python fundamentals here, because it should only say this for me, actually. So if you go to Python fundamentals and go to Python syntax, you should be able to see that information here that I have from the slide. It's just presented in a slightly different way. Okay, so that's not redundant, that I'm showing you what you guys already have. Okay, so we're going to go over the difference between JavaScript and Python syntax and how it relates to types of data, right? So this has to do with the data types that we're already familiar with, numbers, strings. So let's go ahead and dive into it. I've made this slide here, so let's go ahead and present. Intro to Python, everyone. Welcome. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about Python syntax, okay? So it's very, practically speaking, it's pretty much the same thing, except we have to keep in mind these special rules. So let me go ahead and read it here. Python uses indentation to define code blocks. Series of continuous lines of code indented at the same level are considered part of the same code block. Okay, so this is used to define conditions, functions, loops, etc. JavaScript uses curly braces to group statements that belong in the same code. All right, so look at this image here where my mouse is hovering. Let me see if I can use I'll use my pen next lecture. I don't want to break something here. So in this upper right-hand corner, we see an if statement in JavaScript. We know how to write this, right? If, and then open the curly brackets, close curly brackets. We write our code inside here. And then the else statement follows the end of this curly bracket n, and then we write our code in here. But as we can see here, this is different. Now, we just write our if statement, and then we write a colon here, double dot, colon, not semicolon. And so when we write a colon here, we indent, and that's how it knows that the code belongs to this if statement by the indentation. So you already see there, that's something different off the bat. That's the difference between Python and JavaScript that we have to know right now, is that indentation matters. So sometimes a code will break because the indentation is not proper. And the Python interpreter will tell you sometimes. But so you know, this is the difference, all right? Variable naming conventions. Oh, and this is not really relating to what we're talking about here, but this is something more related to what the difference of an object would look like, right? So we should have some familiarity with what a JavaScript object looks like with the constructor. We're going to be seeing this a lot more, this type of constructor in Python, but not to worry if you don't know what this is yet or how this would work, all right? This is just a preview of what's to come. So variable naming conventions. Python follows the convention of using underscores for spaces in variable names. So whereas in JavaScript, we used camel case. Remember that what that was? Can anyone tell me what camel case is? Yeah, I mean it's right here. Look, the way that's spelled. Two words are put together, right? My variable. My is lowercase, right? And then every word coming after it is going to have the first letter of that word capitalized. So my variable is one variable in camel case. Now we're going to be using what's called snake case, right? So underscores and lowercase letters, no uppercase, just underscores between variable names. Okay, so we'll have more practice on that. I had created a slide that I deleted, but we will practice that nonetheless. All right, and then data types and values. Python has a special value called none, and that is to indicate that a variable doesn't have a value at a particular point in that program, right? So who can think of what the equivalent of something with that would be in JavaScript? Can anyone give me a guess? Let me pull up the chat here because I'm just only looking for the talkers. No, okay, pretty good. All right, so JavaScript uses null. The answer is right there. JavaScript uses null to represent the intentional absence of any object value. Just checking to see if you guys are paying attention. All right, so far so good, not so difficult. Let's talk about types of data that we will encounter um, in programming, right? In general, but specifically now in Python. So I've listed the composite data types on the left-hand side here and the non-composite data types. Who can tell me the difference between what a composite data type and a non-composite data type is? Not everyone at once. Someone said it earlier. What's the difference between a composite and simple data type? If you guys don't know, I'll tell you. I mean, it's a give it a guess if you don't know. I mean, what's the difference between a number and a dictionary, right? Yeah, one has multiple values and can have multiple different types of values, right? A list can hold number and a string and, anything else it wants. So, let's go through the simple data types first. Let's talk about strings, just a little bit of review. A string is a value made up of text. A classic example of a string is the code hello world, right? So anything within the quotations like you see there, hello world. All right, in Python strings, excuse my typo there. Strings are enclosed using single or double quotes, as you saw there. Ignore my typo. And a string is one of the simplest data types in any language. Most information that's passed between programs, FYI, is a string, right? So like when you enter in a username or first name or email address to an account, what is that? That's a string, right? That's a simple data type. Strings are treated as a collection of characters. So the string 123 is different from the numerical value 123. A substring is part of a string. Okay. And there's lots of things that we can do with strings using using the Python library. We can join strings, that's known as concatenation. We can insert the value of a variable into a string, that's known as interpolation. And we're going to be getting into that in this course. Changing the string's case, we can do that as well. We can strip the extra white space from a string. We can search for a substring within a string or replace some of the characters in a string. And I know this whole slide is riddled with typos, but you can see here it's fresh off the print. So we're talking about data types. We've finished talking about strings, and so we have a question here. So Python does not care about char and string. They can both use single or double quote. Yes, that is true. Good question, Yon. And I have a poll here that I need to practice using. So let me just see if this poll works well. Let me launch it, and we're going to see how well do we feel like we understand what strings are. Just I want to touch base to see how well this poll is working and how well you guys are following me along. We all know what a string is and how we can manipulate a string from our last stack. And again, I want to welcome you guys to interrupt me if you have any questions, okay? We're here to learn. So even if you think I'm on a good track explaining something, interrupt me, ask me a question. If I don't know it, someone here does, right? So we're gonna figure it out. All right, so let's continue. Strings are very simple. We know what a string is. Another data type is a Boolean value. A Boolean value represents either true or false. In Python, these values are written true and false, as you see here with the capital T, capital F. Boolean values can represent the state of a program or a certain condition, right? So we want Booleans in our program. They're super useful. You can use variables such as, like, for example, let's say your game is active or can edit, or if the polling is open, depending on what type of app you're using, you're going to have that as a Boolean value, true or false, right? And so these values are true. If these values are true, then the certain sections of code are or should be enabled. All right. Again, we talked about null already, but null is a value that represents nothing. You would assign null to a value to a variable that doesn't have a defined value. And for Python, that is written as none, right? So capital N, none. Logical comparisons, none evaluates to false. It's a falsy. Who can tell me, if anyone knows, what the difference between a truthy and a falsy statement is? Anyone give a guess? Okay, write that question down and do some research on your own. If I just spew information to you, you may not remember it. Look up what is the difference between a truthy and falsy statement. Okay, it's not that hard. Here's the next one. The null value is useful for many situations. You can use it to make some parameters for a functional operation. To make a function optional, sorry. If a value is provided, the parameter is assigned to the given value. We don't really need to know about all this right now. Too much information. So let's just know what null is and how it works. It's a falsy statement. So falsy, okay, let me just sum it up for you. It's a false-like value, okay? So none or false are falsies, false-like values. Okay, now we've talked about Booleans. They're either true or false. We should know this already, right? Pretty easy. Let's talk about numbers. All right. So just like JavaScript, we had numbers. So we're going to have numbers in Python. Numerical data. So some questions to ask. What are the two main differences in the types of numerical data, right? How do we convert between the two? And because there's more than one type. So we have int and float. Let's talk about the difference. An integer or int is a number that doesn't have a decimal point. A float is a number that does. Okay, there's two different types of ints in Python, or numbers, I mean. All right, so there's int, which is an integer, which is a number without a decimal, and a float, which is a number that does have a decimal. All right. And here are some functions that you can use that will help you. So the type function identifies the data type of its argument. So let's see if I can use this here. Pull up my terminal. Give me a second to see if I can make a. All right. So let's see here. I have, oh, I can't pull up my terminal on a full screen. Just let's see here. Excuse me, not what I want you to do. Okay, so let's use these functions, and I don't want this here, so what is that there? Okay. I can zoom out. Here we are. Oh, here we are. Technical difficulties. Here we go. So I have here a Python in my terminal, right? I can exit. Oop, no, that's not the command. But I'm already in it. Here I am. I know I'm in it because I typed in Python 3 I should have already Python installed on all of your guys' devices. I'm using a Mac, so I have to say Python 3 to get started. For you PC users, you could just use or type in Python, right? So here I have the terminal, and we can write um, some variables, right? So what if I say x equals 5, okay? And I want to print something. I'm going to say print x. It's going to give me 5, right? Because print is basically the same as console log. So remember that switch from console log to print now. James, Mr. Fern, I see your hand raised. Do falsy values have other properties besides just being false? Can you treat null as the same exact as a Boolean false? Um, Not exactly the same. Sometimes they can be swapped. It's a very specific situation that you would be applying the difference. Um, but it's not essential to know now. I kind of just threw you guys a curveball. But it's something to definitely know, just not super important to memorize right now. I'm not shrugging your question, but if I give you too much information in the class, then we'll be overwhelmed here. So what I want to show through this terminal is this type function, right? So if I type in type and I type in the variable here, then we know it's a int, right? So what if I make y equal to be 5.55555, okay? And I print y, just make sure it's there. There we are. And if I check the type of y, now it tells me it's a float because it has decimal points after. So this type here will let you know what type of number it is. So just some cool functions, inbuilt functions in JavaScript. What else here? Sometimes numerical information starts with as a string. The float function converts properly formatted strings to floats. Let's check that out. So if I say z equals 1, 2, 3, and what if I say float z, or no, yeah, float z. There we are. See now the difference between that, well, you see it, 123.0. It's a float type now as a 0.0. Let's convert it to an integer. So if I say int and then I put z in there, back to an integer type, no longer a float. And then so we can convert strings to integers as well, right? So we can say what's another one? W equals 1, 2, 3, 4. And I want to convert this string to an integer, so I can say int w. And there we are. Now it's back to an integer. So there's a difference between strings, as we know, and numbers, right? And there's two different types of numbers, integers and floats. And now we know how to convert between the two by using these inbuilt functions. So here we are. Here's an example. A couple more examples here. Not something we have to know right away, but it's useful. Some useful tricks of Python that maybe we wouldn't have known to do using JavaScript. All right, so if I see any other terminal examples, I'll go ahead and use those. Numbers. Okay, so we finished talking about simple data types. Now let's go ahead and cover composite data types. What's the difference in the types of data that we may see in a composite data type? A dictionary, as we know from JavaScript, is a set of items. Each item consists of a key and value, key value pair. You define a dictionary using braces. So this is how you would define a dictionary using in Python. Okay. So how then would we access some of the information in the dictionary? Anyone want to give a guess? let's create a dictionary together. Okay. I'm going to create a dictionary here. You guys still see my screen, right? Yep. Okay, cool. So I'm going to create a dictionary here. I'm going to say capitals, var capitals. And by the way, no, we don't have to say var in Python. We just say the name of the variable, capitals. All right. And this is going to be a list of capitals. So here is my dictionary I'm working within here. So the first one, I'm going to say capital of Arkansas. Um, so I'm going to say AK for Arkansas. I'm going to say, anyone know by chance what the capital of Arkansas is?
Little Rock.
Is that correct, Jinu? No, I'm just getting wrong sources here.
They said Little Rock.
Little Rock. Okay. What about Alabama? What's the capital of Alabama?
Montgomery, I think.
And that is the name of the county I'm living in here in Texas. And so what about this one? I know, but now I'm testing you guys. What about Arizona? Phoenix. Phoenix. I like that one. Okay. All right, so here we have our capitals dictionary. I think we're all set. Any syntax errors that I see here? And so what's something we notice in similarity as well between this and JavaScript? Anyone want to point it out? I'm just looking for a simple, easy answer. Besides yeah, just what's different? What's the same? We still have commas between key value pairs, right? That's still the same. We still have curly brackets. That's still the same. Not too much of a difference. Very easy, right? We already know then how to write an object in Python. This is good news. So this is not something we should feel overwhelmed with or complicated. So let's go ahead and create this dictionary. And so let's go ahead and access the capital of Arkansas. So how could I go about doing this? Anyone want to give me a guess or type it in the chat? Okay. Brackets. I like that, but that's not the complete answer. So let's give a more complete answer, somebody. There we go. I see it. So I'm going to say the name of the variable that holds the dictionary, capitals, right? Obviously, we got to start with something, context, and then the brackets. What goes in the brackets is important. We need to put the key there in quotations, as you see here. And so what should we see? Little Rock. There we go. So now we can access the values in a dictionary. Okay, so how about reassigning a value in a dictionary? I want to change the capital of Arizona from Phoenix to what's another mythological creature? Griffin or something. Yeah, let's change Arizona's capital name from Phoenix to Griffin. Just throw everybody off living there. Anyone want to show me how I would do that? Type it in the chat. Don't be shy. Don't worry about making an error either. Super simple. All right, I'll go ahead and give it a shot. I'm going to say capitals at Arizona. Oops, sorry. And I'm going to say the new value is going to be, I don't know how to spell Griffin. Is that it? Cool. There we go. Oh, all right. We got it from Manjira. Very nice, Manjira. So if I now say print capitals, we have a change. So now we are able to edit a dictionary. Also very important. Okay. Anyone want to give a guess on how to delete a certain key value pair?
No.
Pop. Okay, that's a good one. You can also do this. You can say that. Delete. And what that will do is delete. Oh, did I make a error? Cap it. Oh, yeah, there we go. I made an error in my spelling. So if I press the up arrow, cap it. There we go. Should be good. Okay, so if I say now print capitals, only 2 key value pairs. Looking good? Everyone happy? Okay, let's do another poll. Poll. All right. Relaunch. How well do we feel about understanding how the concept of a Python dictionary works, how we can access a value through the key value pair, how we can edit a value, how we can delete a value? Yeah. This shouldn't be so difficult because at this point, I mean, it's very similar to JavaScript, very similar syntax and how to write a dictionary. Okay, and I'm seeing good numbers on the poll. All right. And again, we have plenty of TAs, we have plenty of instructors. Don't be shy to bug us in our off hours if you're not getting a concept. Okay, so dictionaries. We're covering data types still, so let's go ahead and look at lists. Okay, lists are very similar, right? Who can tell me, I mean, what they see different in this type of list than what they would see in a JavaScript list? Any clues, any guesses? It's already there. What's the difference between a list and a dictionary?
Index number.
Exactly. So a dictionary has information organized in it by key value pair. A list has information listed by numerical value. And so let's create a list. All right, so let's create a list. I'm gonna say let's see, bucket list. Bucket list equals what add some things to do to my bucket list. Visit Seattle. Okay. I don't know why, but it's there. I need to ride mechanical bull. And anyone else want to add to my bucket list? I've taken skydiving off. How about just um getting a dog? There we go. I haven't had my own dog before. Getting a dog. Well, I've always been a family dog. Okay, so I have my list. There we go. So now let's go ahead and access values in this list. How do I access the second value that I see in my list, in my bucket list? Okay, so we have to say, all right, good job, Manjira, but we're missing something here still. Let's be exact. There we go. So bucket list. Ride mechanical bull. Has anyone ever done that, by the way? Is that really that dangerous or exciting? I have. James has. Okay. Did it hurt? Okay. All right. Okay, so there we go. So we have access to our list, and we know we can access it through that numerical value. We also have these negative values as well that we can access through. So, right, so what would be, how can we access the numerical value, the negative index, this value through the negative index? How do we count through this using the negatives? Did you see how it counted through here in the set? It says -1, -2, -3. So let's see here. -1, -2. If we say bucket list at -2, what do we get? The one second to the end of the list. So we have a way of ordering our array that we can access the end of the array or the second to the last of the array. Then we number from left to right, starting 0, 1, 2, 3. We number from right to left, starting -1, -2, -3. The difference is left to right, we start with 0. Difference is right to left, you start with -1. Okay. So far, so good. Let's do another poll. Why not? How are we doing on time, by the way? Okay, we still have a good chunk of time left. Very cool. All right, so what I want to sum up is that the only difference here between lists in Python and in JavaScript is that now we have access to these negative values, as we've said. Not so, we're not going to use this, but just FYI, okay? But a list is pretty much the same. We know what a list, how it works, what it is, what it does, how we can access the values. It's by index, right? So cool. And what's another composite data type? It's called tuples or tuples. Tuple is an ordered collection of items that can't be modified. It is usually indicated by parentheses. So as you can see here, I have a variable called elementary grades. Imagine this is like some variable in a database for a school or something, right? And you don't want the grades to be changed ever, so you put it in a tuple. If you try to modify an element in a tuple, you'll get an error. Tuples are useful when you have a collection of items that shouldn't change throughout the life of your program. Okay, so let's go ahead and make a tuple. How about that? So uh, let's make it just like I have it on the slide. Elementary, can I clear here? No, there's no clear. Elementary grades equals tuple 2, 3, 4. And so let's have some participation going on. How do we access the second value in that tuple? Any guesses? All right. The way that we access is by indexes. So we say elementary grades. If we say at 0, or sorry, that's not 0, that's 1. There we get the first value. What if we try to say, what if we try to enter in a new value, like elementary grades? I want to, like, let's say I'm a hacker in the system and I found elementary grades, and I'm going to just change all the second graders, and I'm gonna put them back a grade. Okay. So I'll say equals 1. All right. So now I'm going to try to change something in this tuple. The value at index 1, I'm going to change from a 2 to 1. Oh, and we have an error. Tuple object doesn't support item assignment. So as we've said, that's what we're going to get as an error. You'll get an error. That's the error. Does not support item assignment. So whatever when a tuple is created, that's the values that it's that what it receives is what it gets, and it's what it's going to keep. Cool. Any questions
Could
about?
you
Yes.
could you delete it and then create a new one if you need to edit something in there, like you made a mistake on it?
Yeah, you can delete a tuple. Yeah, any variable can be deleted, but the contents of the variable cannot be edited. Yeah, good question. A tuple is an array of values that cannot, yeah, it can't be changed like a const. Ah, well, yes, const is one example in JavaScript, but remember there's some rules that go along with const and how JavaScript variables work. And I'm not saying that about this in Python here. Cool. All right, so we've gone over different types of data. So far we've found how similar uh, Python is to JavaScript as far as syntax, right? We've gone over what syntax looks like, functions we indent, and all the variable names we say we're in snake case, and then our data types we have one extra one called tuple, and pretty much everything works and is exactly the same as JavaScript except for a slight difference in some of the ways that we can access different types of numbers, and dictionaries and lists work exactly the same, just slight differences. Let's talk a little bit more about numbers because numbers are really uh, well, Python is used in so many applications related to doing math and science. So just wanted to harp on this a little bit. Integers and floats are two main kind of numerical data types. You know this already, right? You know the difference between an integer and a float. So, um, what I just wanted to mention is that you can do higher order operations, right? We did this in JavaScript, but just had to mention that you can do this in Python as well. So it helps you do higher order operations. And what's a good acronym that helps us remember the order of operations? Anyone remember from programming basics? It was day 2 or day 3? Starts with the P, PEMDAS. There we go, PEMDAS. And it stands for parentheses, exponent, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. So you can say, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally as a way to remember that order. I don't know why that sticks or why that's always taught that way, but it is, and so we use it. And so PEMDAS is a way that we know the order of operations. Python respects that order of operations, so it's going to follow it. And you can also use these third-party libraries. We're not going to get into that in this course, but just so you know, you can use NumPy, Sci5, Pandas. There's lots of cool tools to make Python work for you. A lot of math libraries that will make Python a great um, math language for you. Okay. Uh, we don't deal with math concepts too much, but in case you know or don't know what an imaginary number is, it's this complex number that Python can deal with. All right, let's talk a little bit more about strings. Okay, we said a string can be in a double or single quote, so that's mentioned already. But we want to talk about what and how we can manipulate a string, right? So Um, we can insert tabs and new lines into strings using the special sequences /t and /n. There's no limit on the length of a string. And a string method is a function that performs an action to a string. So remember, we can change, for example, and we'll use these examples. We'll do this right now. We'll use title, upper, and lower um, to go ahead and change some values in the string. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna say, what's the name of variable for a title? Movie movie title equals um The Godfather, right? And so we're going to change this to a title. So we're going to say title, movie title. Ooh, title is not defined. Do you mean tuple? Is that not a math function working for me? Did I spell it wrong? And maybe. All right, let's see if one more test to see if this works. Okay. Upper, not upper. Movie title. Huh. I think there's something here that's missing. But don't worry about that. These are just extra functions methods that I'll figure out how to get them working. Let's talk about using variables and strings. Okay? At some point we're going to be creating variables and inserting them into strings. So this is one way to do string interpolation. And we can do it this way. So for example, we write a string here, starts with the quotes inside this parentheses. Before we write an F, before the quotations, and then we write the name of the variable. So the F is short for format, and it tells the Python to insert the value of the variable listed in the braces of the string. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to create a variable called username. Username equals Vincent. Okay. And so I'm going to print this here with that variable here, like this F string, just like it is here. So let's go ahead and say print. And then in here, before we start our quotations, we say F. Okay, just like we have it here. F, then the quotations. Welcome back. And then we say the variable name here. So username. And then end the quotes and the parentheses. And let's see this work. And inside here where we inserted username, which is the name, this variable that holds Vincent's name. When we print this with the F here in front of the quotations, then we can get that variable inserted into the string. Right? And so what this is called is interpolation. Yes. Exactly, Oriel. This is interpolation. Okay, let's take a quick poll before we continue. How well do we understand string interpolation and how to write a variable in a string? All right, looks like we're moving along. Smooth sailing. Okay, let's talk a little bit about comments. What are comments? We know what comments are. Someone tell me. Should be easy. I mean, you guys were tested on that, right? If you had comments in your code. So someone say it real quick. What's a comment? There we go. Someone already giving me examples. Yes, a comment. Manjira. So your question related to string interpolation. We'll go over more string interpolation in a bit. I've just gone over one way. So yes, we'll talk about more than one way to do string interpolation in just a second. But since we moved to comments, let's talk about what comments are, right? So comment is a way to ignore text in your code. And in Python, they begin with the hash mark. So the way that we would write a comment in JavaScript, this would be a multi-line comment, right? We do the slash star, star slash. Here, we can just put we can just highlight that block of code, like we'll be working in VS Code. You highlight it and you command slash, and that will put these hashtags in front of everything, which will comment that line specifically. Okay, so comments are very simple. just a hash line before each line to comment. Anyone an old school programmer where they had to, where comments was writing comments was like a tedious, super hard task? I'm not, but I always hear it from older generation programmers how difficult it was to write objects, comments, anything. And right, so lastly, we have the difference in conditional statements, right? So what's the difference between how we write a conditional statement in JavaScript versus in Python? All right, so an if statement, if we don't remember, we should remember, an if statement allows us to set a condition on whether a certain code runs. For example, using a variable called gameActive, you could use an if statement to ensure the code that starts a game runs, right? And then you can set it to true. So an if statement, as we see in this upper right-hand corner, in JavaScript, we would write the code with curly brackets and the condition within the parentheses. Now, all we have to do is say if, and then we write the condition, and then we write a colon at the end. And remember, the way the Python interpreter knows that you are writing code for this if statement specifically is by the indentation. Where your indentation is in the code matters. Whereas here it's for convenience and readability. Here it's by necessity in Python. So we got to remember when we indent in Python, it matters. Okay? All right. And so we have an if statement, and we know how it's written differently. And so we have slight differences in how the elif is written, right? Else if is written. And so we can say, as we see in this image, on JavaScript, if condition, and then else if. Remember what an else if statement does? What's the difference between an else if and an if in both languages? They're the same. What's the difference between an else if and an else in checking a function? An if statement.
And else is the final line of code. It's like everything else has failed, so we're going to fall back to this. And else this is like, okay, what worked? We tried something before, it didn't work, so maybe we'll try this.
Right. And so it matters then that the order of the else if and the else, right? You have to place the else last if you want it to be the last condition that's checked. And the else if conditions have to not have been met. And the order of conditions that are checked in the else if matter as well. Right? So, oh, sorry. And so again, it matters where you indent. So it's very, you have to have really clean code in order to code in Python here. It's a little bit more readable, I think, than JavaScript, but you have to be more particular in your indentation. There's less room for error, as you can see. And the difference between an else if is just the way it's written, elif, right? Like elf, but we put an I in there, elif. And so that's the difference between an else if in JavaScript and Python. You can use the elif or else if statement to make your program respond to multiple conditions. The code structure means if one condition applies, do this, else if a different condition applies, do something different. You can chain together as many of these specific conditions as you need, and we should already know this from programming basics. An else block runs a particular block of code when all other conditions don't apply. An else block must always be the last block, and an if, elif, else chain. Okay, so it's very simple. Remember, one of the pillars of programming are if statements, and then the other one is what's the other pillar? It's right here, loops. The other pillar of programming is loops, right? So how we write a for loop versus or a while loop in Python versus JavaScript, we're going to learn that right now. So a loop is a block of code, as you guys know, that runs multiple times. And you need to use loops when you need to repeat actions more than once, depending on the criteria, right? So a for loop is written as such. Let's look at that in the top right corner. For lm in iterable, right? So for element in iterable code, that's all you need to write to make a for loop, and then you write your code below it. Whereas JavaScript, you have to write this parentheses, and then you have to declare a var element, and then you can say of. This is a shorthand way to for loop through something. But remember, we used to have for element, and then we would do a semicolon, and then while I is less than, or while element is less than length of iterable, then iterate through it, and then iterate iterable plus plus. This is the shorthand way in JavaScript of writing that simple for loop, going left to right, for element of iterable, right? And then you write this parentheses and bracket here. And an even simpler way then would be to write it in Python for lm and iterable. That will say for whatever variable you create right there in that moment to loop through that iterable variable. And then you just write the code in here for whatever you want it to do. So this is a basic way to write a for loop. 4 words, right? Pretty simple. Pretty simple compared to programming basics. So let's continue. We know then the difference between how a for loop and while loop works, right? Let's sum up for me. What's the difference between a for and while loop? Who can tell me how the functional difference of each works? While loop. What does a while loop do compared to a for loop? It does the same thing, right? But how does it do it? It checks to see if a condition is true, right? So a for loop, you're going to iterate through a variable that already has like a composite data type. It could be a list. While a while loop, you're checking if a condition is true. And it's really easy to write in JavaScript, right? You just say while and then the condition in the parentheses. Only difference in Python now is you're saying while the condition, and then you write colon, and then you indent, and then you write what you want to be in the while loop like that. Okay. So, pretty simple. Not that much difference. So what are we noticing so far that's the main difference between the syntax in Python and JavaScript? Someone say it for me so I know you guys are following along. What's the main difference between syntax in Python and JavaScript so far, if you had to sum it up? Indentation, okay? Indentation, you remove the brackets, less parentheses, yeah. And one more thing I want you guys to say. What's the other one? One more little tiny detail you guys haven't mentioned yet. Keywords, no, not exactly. I mean, it's right here. What do you see here on the left-hand side that you don't see on the right? No, colons. There we go. No need. Oh, there's 2 in 1. I didn't expect that. You don't need to use var, right? When you're creating the iterable or the element that's going to iterate through that iterable variable. So you don't need to use that var to create that variable. And the colon, right? Mickey got it. I want you guys to notice that there's a colon after the while and for loop instead of a bracket. Okay, no need to use code block. So instead of the bracket, we use a colon and then we indent. Not too hard, right? Pretty simple. And you guys are learning Python all in one day. Now, I mean, it doesn't mean that you've used it in a program, but you definitely can say that you now know how to write in Python. And so what we also want to review is a nested for loop. Okay, so what's a nested for loop? And we know what a for loop is. We know what a nested for loop. I know you guys know because you guys have done it in last course. But a for loop within a for loop, right? That's a nested for loop, like a Russian doll, like one and another and another. And so the way that we would write that in JavaScript is going to be a little different, as we've stated. Python is different. The only difference is indentation, right? So this for loop is within this greater for loop, and we know that because it's indented inside of it. So we have to pay attention to indentation now. That's how we know that something's inside of another thing, whether it's a child of the parent. and to use HTML terms, right? So we know this for loop is nested within this for loop because of where it's indented. So we have to be cautious of that, because let's say we wanted two separate for loops, right? If we accidentally indent a for loop when we don't want it to be a nested for loop, then we'll have what we're trying to avoid, a nested for loop. So whatever for loops you're writing, make sure you don't nest them in one another by accident, is what I'm trying to tell you. Okay? Okay. So let's take a poll. This will be the last poll. How well do we feel like we'll be able to understand the simple differences in syntax between Python and JavaScript? Cool. Well, I'm seeing great results on this poll. I think that yeah, that you guys are expected to have a little bit of a learning curve to this, right? It's not everything is learned in the moment you see it, but it's pretty easy lesson going forward. Low stress levels, as we said. All right, so that ends today's lecture, or this morning's lecture. Let's go over the calendar and talk about what we have in our agenda today. All right, so here we are. We've broke the ice. We know each other a little better now. Oh, that's not good. We've got an intro into Python now. We have a basic understanding of the syntactical difference between how Python is written and how JavaScript is written. What you guys are free to do now until 2 Mountain Time is to pair program, right? And what you have to do as far as an end of day assignment, and I do encourage you guys to get ahead once you guys have finished this one, is this assignment here. Nested dictionaries and lists, right? I know some of you have completed that already, but if you hadn't finished this is one of the core assignments. So I'd encourage you to read through every single module here just to make sure you cover something that you may have missed already, right? I've selected the key information here, but what you guys need to be able to do now is to manipulate a dictionary and manipulate a list, just like we did in today's lecture, right? So we went over dictionary manipulation, and this is a list containing dictionaries, right? So we know if it starts with the bracket, it's a list. If there's curly brackets within the bracket, then this is a dictionary within a list. And so the assignment is to update values in these dictionaries and lists, as we've said here. And we also want to get these values as well. So pretty straightforward, pretty much related to, like stuff you would be doing in programming basics, just now doing it only in Python today. Okay, so that's your end of the day goal, to get that assignment done. And let's see the homework here. Python, your homework is to read ahead, right? And what we're going to want you guys to read ahead on, if you have some time today, is modules and packages. So do a little bit of reading on this. This module here is linked on the calendar. Once you get through that, consider tomorrow's end of day assignments. Users with bank accounts. Do some reading before the lecture so that we can prepare. Okay, this afternoon, I'm going to check in with you guys and also prepare a little bit more lecture material. We're going to be going over more dictionaries and lists in Python, just so that we know that we have that covered in your guys' assignments. We'll just do a little lab practice lecture / check-in. Okay, so today's your day to get familiar with Python. All right. We're still going to be using JavaScript as a language to change like the front end, but we're not going to be dealing with front end at all this whole month. So the way that you guys have learned to make a pretty website, you guys have that in your back pocket, but we're going to be working with Python now. We're not going to have to worry about JavaScript at all. So get familiar with Python today so that for the rest of this month, it's not a foreign language to you. So it should be second nature. And it will be your second language, right? So exciting. All right. Does anyone have any questions before we close out and open up the breakout rooms? All right. Everyone feeling pretty confident so far? That's good. All right. So we have a lot of learning to do this month. I want you guys to get as ahead as possible. Don't hesitate to drop in the instructors and TAs rooms here. We're here to help you. Okay. Let's go ahead and close the recording, and I'll meet you guys at 2 Mountain Time.